All right, so if you're watching this video, you are ready to learn how to create fur texture with colored pencils. I'm going to be looking off of this little reference image, same one as is your worksheet, and I'm going to try to duplicate that over in this rectangle. So when I focus in on hair or fur texture in a realistic image, I usually try to follow three basic rules. Rule number one is pay attention to where the light areas are and dark areas. And that is pretty much already mapped out for you with the use of these lines here. It kind of separates the lighter fur from the darker fur. So always map out your chunks of hair based off of lightness and darkness. So when you're creating hair or fur texture, it's pretty much a series of lines. Lines on top of lines overlapping each other, creating a texture. And the second rule I typically follow with my lines is that they have to be flowing in the correct direction. So all of these lines are flowing pretty much left to right, maybe at a slight angle. So if I start creating lines going up and down, it's going to totally change the look of this and it will not look like the original image. So for rule number two, your lines that you're creating must flow in the correct direction. The third rule I typically follow with creating fur or hair texture is having the correct length of your lines. So we already talked about mapping out your light areas and dark areas. We talked about how fur was a series of lines overlapping each other. The second rule was making sure that your lines flow in the right direction. And now the third rule is that your lines are the correct length. So if you have long flowing hair, you're going to need longer lines. If you have really short hair, like the nose of a cat or something, you're going to be using really small lines. So I'm going to start my drawing by filling in some of the darker areas. Same with the way I approach the eye. I mapped out I figured out where the darker areas were, filled in those shadows, and then built off of that. So I'm going to continue working here with the shadowy dark areas. So I went ahead and filled in some of the darker areas with my black and really dark brown colors. And I made sure that I was using long flowing lines, especially for this area up top. And I observed that they were kind of curving down, then back up, then down again. So that's the flow of my lines. These are a little bit longer. There's some lines in here a little bit shorter. So I'm paying attention to the length of my lines. And I'm definitely paying attention to where the lights and darks are. So now it's time for me to go in with my lighter browns, and I want to make sure that if there's ever highlights in the hair, I'm going to leave those pretty empty, and I'm going to be able to fill that in with my really light tan, and I'm going to burnish that with white to get that highlight look right around here and here, maybe a little bit here. But for now, I'm going to go in with my lighter browns and continue my series of lines, creating more texture. So I went ahead and filled in some more lines with a slightly lighter brown. Now I'm going to go in with my lightest brown, it's like more of like a tan, I'm going to fill in more of the space here. And another trick that you're going to want to keep in mind is to definitely keep your pencil very sharp. If your pencil is dull, it's going to make wide, blurry lines, and it won't give you that fine line texture that you need for the hair. So we're going to come in and almost blend and burnish some of these line textures with my lightest brown, and it's going to kind of smear some of the lines together. And I'm still going to try to avoid going around that highlighted area. You can get in there a little bit more with your lightest color. But right now I'm just kind of smearing some of those lines together to create more of a saturated look. But just keep in mind all those tricks I taught you to: 1, pay attention to lights and darks. 2, with your series of lines, make sure they're flowing in the correct direction. And also make sure that they are a decent and appropriate length. So once I smear this a little bit, you can always get a colorless blender or a white and burnish even more. You may want to use a little bit of white by the highlights, really make that pop out. And the colorless blender is great for blending your texture, especially in some of the darker areas. And if you lose some of your crisp, dark texture lines, you can always go back in with a really sharp, dark brown pencil and get some of that back on top of your burnishing. And then finally, if you ever overdo it with a little bit too much dark color, you can always take a white gel pen and add some brighter highlights. In some of the areas that need to be a little bit lighter, and get some more fine lines going on in those areas, if this will start to work. So that's how you accomplish creating some successful hair texture. Just to recap, hair is pretty much a series of lines, and the 3 main rules you want to focus on is paying attention to where your dark areas are located and your highlights, your lighter areas. And if you keep those accurate, that's going to be a huge plus for you. And then with your series of lines, making sure they flow in the correct direction is crucial if you want it to look like the photo reference you're working from, and the length of your lines is also going to be very important. So hopefully this works out well for you. Good luck.